Personally, I'm not really surprised to find out that CBC might not be as popular as it once was, partly because their journalism has kind of failed to keep up with the times, in my humble opinion. More important though is whether people think CBC is propaganda or not. And according to this polling, the majority of folks think that CBC is independent and not propaganda, but it's still only 60%. Journalism provided by the CBC is propaganda on behalf of the federal government. 40%. That is quite a large amount of Canadians who are thinking that CBC is basically the word of the federal government. It's a wonderful day in the homiehood, a wonderful day for a homie. Won't you be my homie to Taro? They have a whole link to this article here that gives a lot more of these insights. CBC support is softer than you might think. It's not quite 100 years old, and it's not a sure thing that it will make it to 100. This is from Bruce Anderson, the guy who tweeted this out. I guess he's worked for 40 years in polling. He's been polling for 40 years. I gotta say, I kind of like the branding that they've done on this page here. Shut it down. As Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre ratchets up his campaign to defund the CBC, many observers are tempted to believe that he is alienating a huge swath of Canadians. Our Spark Insights research reveals that across the country, 45% are drawn to the argument, shut the CBC down to save tax dollars, and only a bare majority, 55, choose I value the CBC and want it maintained, given these two alternatives. Okay, a very black and white alternative, so in my opinion, not necessarily the most valuable conclusion being reached here. I actually don't know how I would answer this question, because personally, I would like to see the CBC transformed into something better than it currently is. So we got two choices. Let's shut it down and save the money, or I value and would like it maintained. I genuinely can't give an answer because I don't really want it maintained. Maintaining it means maintaining the status quo, and shutting it down means giving in to the rise of fake news and sensationalized news. So, I can't say. And I guess to me this reveals, one of the problems with polling. Where's the third answer here? And I guess I would lean on this side. I guess I would lean to maintaining the status quo, which I hate to say. Here's the breakdown. Let's shut it and save the money. I value and would like to maintain. Okay, shut and save is blue. Value and maintain is gray. So Alberta, 57% shut and save. Conservative Party, 67% want to shut it down and save. And young people, also 55%, are leading the way here. That's kind of interesting. And then, the national average here at the top. 55% of young people, I guess I could understand, because CBC does not do a very good job of reaching young people where they are, right? They're doing television, radio. Who has time as a young person to be like, oh, why don't I tune in to CBC News and watch commercials during the break? No young person between 18 and 29 really wants to do that. Not really surprised here to find that the Conservative Party and the People's Party hate the CBC. While interestingly enough, the Bloc Québécois super in favor of the CBC, and the NDP leading the way with 67% value and maintain the CBC. I don't know. I wonder why that is. I guess as the most progressive party, they might value journalism the most. Here we also have Quebec, 47%. Interesting to see that higher, much higher than the Bloc Québécois party there. I guess there's probably a lot of conservatives also in Quebec. Alberta. Oh wait, Atlantic. I love how Atlantic only ever gets its own polling. They don't even bother going province to province in the Atlantic provinces. They're just like Atlantic. Okay. While Atlantic values the CBC, maybe because like more rural communities, they benefit from the radio and television footage that they receive out there. Um, Ontario, 47%. I guess not really surprising that Alberta and Saskatchewan, Manitoba are kind of the most conservative of the provinces, and BC also quite low, I guess, in terms of these standards. Although I would like to see this whole thing kind of like lowered across the board in terms of people who want to shut it down and save money. Um, so here, part of the analysis, to be sure, conservative voters, 66% led the way in enthusiasm for shutting the corporation down. But just over 1 in 3, 36% of liberal voters feel this way, and a third of NDP voters do too. A striking number in the mix has to do with younger people. A majority of those under 30, 55%, would close the CBC down, and while Albertans, 57%, lead all regions in desire to end the CBC. Quebec residents are not that far behind, 47%. Yeah, I mean, and Ontario too. It's just like very foolish, I think. But again, this is a binary poll, so not necessarily revealing to us that much about what people's opinions are. For a lot of people, they could potentially be swayed from being in the shutdown category into like a transformation category. And I think hopefully CBC takes some of this data and says to itself, okay, well, maybe we can do a better job appealing to people who are 18 to 29 years old, like young people, you know. Is CBC News propaganda? While most people don't think CBC News is propaganda, a striking 40% believe the opposite. Once again, young people are far more likely than older people to feel this way. What? This is crazy. 2/3 of conservative voters, 64%, think the CBC journalism is propaganda on behalf of the federal government, as do 60% of the People's Party voters. You know what? I could understand the People's Party thinking this because they are more kind of anti-establishment. But what do you think? What do conservative voters think would happen if they gain power? Which is like the most likely scenario if we were to have an election today, would be for the conservatives to be the new federal government. If 64% of conservatives think that CBC is propaganda on behalf of the federal government, doesn't that follow that they would be part of the propaganda? And shouldn't they also then not be conservative voters if they think that it's part of these state mechanisms? It's just like very confusing. But then again, like conservatism to me is confounding in general. So while those numbers are obviously challenging for the CBC, it might be just as worrisome to realize that a quarter of Liberal and NDP voters think the same way. That is also concerning. Like, I guess like you could have like really different reasons though. NDP voters, again, I think it would make more sense for them to be skeptical of the reporting, but not necessarily want to shut it down. Albertans, 55%, are convinced CBC News is federal government propaganda. This is crazy though. Is it like to think that it's? I guess it depends. How did they define government propaganda in this? Right? I guess saying that, I guess thinking that the federal government has editorial control over the CBC's reporting. I don't know. It depends on how it was framed to them, right? While BC, Ontario, and Quebec are less likely to think this, of those who think the CBC should be shut down, 2/3 think CBC News is government propaganda. It's kind of crazy. Journalism provided by the CBC is propaganda on behalf of the federal government. CBC journalism is independent and not propaganda. Okay. Again, I guess here's the breakdown of this. Kind of basically pretty similar to what we were already seeing. He's almost exactly the same, is it not? PPC, CPC, it's like exactly the same. 67, 57. Alberta was at 57 up here, and they're at 55. It's pretty much exactly the same. What to make of it? Times have changed in the media landscape, and there is far less attachment to the CBC than was once the case. Presumably, this has a lot to do with the explosion of options for news and entertainment in the digital age, which is reflected in the massive age differences. But there is also possibly a lack of anticipation or consideration of what would be lost. If the CBC was no more, if people think it's not that necessary, then cutting government spending in this area seems like an easy choice. Yeah, and I think that's why there was such a strong support for it in more. I mean, I wouldn't even say strong. I guess none of this is strong support. So I don't know, never mind. But there's also the general decline in trust of institutions, including those of government and the news media, that have been documented in recent months. The spillover effect of polarized cable news channels in the US and the strong evident leanings of some Canadian publications may be making people wonder if objective, unbiased journalism is really possible to find anymore. I find this a kind of like naive framing, personally. Like, it's not that we need unbiased journalism, it's that we need multiple biases, um and transparency of what the biases are. So I don't know. This person works in polling. I don't know, like, they might not, they should actually though have a pretty foundational, like, understanding of what journalism is. Anyways, these numbers don't exactly say that conservative leader Poilievre has a winning strategy, but they should put to rest the notion that he is speaking to a tiny sentiment of the most rabid parts of the right wing. Okay, yeah. So this isn't just a right wing talking point, but there's people in every camp across Canada, whether it's geographic or party affiliation, who feel this way. The CBC, regardless of how the near term of this debate plays out, clearly has a fight on its hand to reconstruct a strong attachment with Canadians and to bolster credibility, something that will be made more difficult and more politically contentious as the topic in national politics. The main takeaway is that people, not just conservatives, feel quite negatively about the CBC. If I worked for a CBC or was in charge of the direction of their company, that would be pretty concerning. Seems like, and not just because of Poilievre, right? They are in kind of the category of like existential threat